What is up, guys? I've got Kyle Lindley here with me. He's working on the back end of the biomechanics stuff at Driveline. He's in the R&D side. We worked together on this one to try and fool everybody as to which pitcher throws harder, but we went a different route this time. Instead of straight up trying to fool you guys and make you pick the wrong one, we picked two throwers that look super similar. And obviously one of these throws was 90, the other throw was 95. So this was a tough one. We asked multiple coordinators from a few different organizations. They were split. We asked the guys at Driveline who accused us of just using the same thrower with two different intensities, which would be funny, but we didn't do that. We even had the thrower who threw 95 pick the other person as the guy who threw harder, which is really funny. So the answer here on this one, the thrower on the right threw 95 and the thrower on the left threw 90. Now the thrower on the right is Hunter Spear. He's a minor leaguer with the Dodgers. And then the thrower on the left is a college player that we can't give you his name for NCAA reasons. But basically, it was super similar. And Kyle picked these two throwers based on some data from the back end of their mocaps. And Kyle, I'm really interested because my function in this was just kind of like helping with the initial ideas, and then you ran with it, and then we kind of both collaborated on like, do they pass the eye test? But I'm really interested. I'm sure everybody else is interested. Why did you pick these two guys? Like, what makes them look so similar for like to the eye?
Yeah, so how we kind of approach assessing people's mechanics with the motion capture lab is basically we capture their motion, obviously, with the markers and the cameras, and then we calculate their kinematics, so like their joint angles, for example, their elbow flexion throughout the throw. And then at a couple points throughout the throw, we will calculate a metric. So like, for example, at foot plant, when their front foot hits the ground, we have a certain like basically a condition that sets that event. Once that happens, then we take everybody's, for example, shoulder external rotation. And then we have a bunch of these metrics. So shoulder external rotation at foot plant, elbow flexion at foot plant. We have things like max external rotation, which like a lot of coaches and players refer to as layback. So we have all these metrics. And then basically for this comparison, because we wanted to make it hard, kind of to show how mechanics can be similar and outcome can be very different. Basically chose a few metrics that look very similar, or would basically like trick the eye to make them like look like the motions are very similar. So for example, the torso positioning. So like how tilted is it laterally, also forward and backwards, how rotated is the torso at foot plant, how long is the stride with in reference to their height, how externally rotated is their shoulder at foot plant. So basically we have all these things, and a couple of the big ones that I think are pretty easy to see with the eyes that we made sure were similar is, one, we wanted height and weight to be decently similar. This guy was a few inches taller, so I think that was like part of the reason this could have been a little tricky, but they were within 15 pounds weight difference. They had similar max linear velocities basically towards home. The torso positioning was very, very close. So laterally between basically home and the pitching rubber, and then also between first and third, their torso was tilted very similarly. So using these metrics, just like when guys have similar values here, we can kind of put them into a bin and then compare them visually to see how like overall visually how their mechanics compare.
Yeah. And that, what threw me off, because when you first gave me the names, I tried to pick files without velos on them. And I looked at them and I was like, okay, well, the guy on the left was like 6'2". He was like 15 pounds heavier. And the guy on the right was like 5'11", 6 foot, and was like 15 pounds lighter. And I was like, okay. And then I noticed the guy on the right moved faster, but the guy on the left moved slower. So in my head, I'm trying to be like, okay, well, the bigger guy's moving slower, but that's expected. But how much does that add in velocity? How much does it take off in velocity? But I think you made such a great point, which is similar movements can get drastically different outcomes, which has been the whole point of us picking these throwers, is that mechanics are extremely important. Like, I don't want people to think that, oh, well, you can just throw whatever you want with terrible mechanics. But ultimately, the difference between guys at lower levels and guys at higher levels is not necessarily their mechanics. It can be their outputs. Obviously, their mechanics are a part of it, but it's also the output they get from each piece individually. So how much energy you send up the chain with your mechanics is really important. But ultimately, it also comes down to how much can you produce with each piece, which it's just a very large equation. And people, obviously in baseball, I'm sure you've heard this so many times from me as well as other people, of just like, does this one metric correlate with velocity? And the answer is probably not, because no one metric correlates velocity. There's always, it's a smorgasbord of freaking a bunch of different other things.
Basically, like we have hundreds of metrics that we calculate per throw on a per throw basis for these guys, and we still haven't figured out throwing, right? And basically with this comparison, we're just picking probably about 15 of those metrics, and these two throwers happen to have similar metrics in those 15 basically areas, and that happen to make them look kind of similar. But it's far from being the full picture. Like, even with all of the metrics that we calculate, we're pretty far from the whole picture, you know? So it's no surprise that these guys can achieve very different things with similar visual looks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the crazy part to me is, you'd be sitting here, obviously these are slowed down too. Like, they're slowed down movements. So if you saw these two guys throwing next to each other, you'd sit there and scratch your head and be like, I mean, they're pretty close to the same size. They're moving pretty close to the same speed. They move pretty much the same. And yet one guy throws 95. I think Hunter tops like 97. And the other guy is throwing 90, So it's just like, it's super interesting. I love getting the information out. I love this collaboration between you and me of just like showing people that more things that matter, helping give people the full picture of really what the equation for velocity is. And ultimately, said it a bunch of times, we'll continue to say it, that mechanics matter, not the end all be all, but it is obviously something you want to learn about, something you want to get better at, and something we're going to continue to learn about. So,
Sir.
Absolutely. Yeah, Kyle, appreciate you taking the time. Everybody who's watching, appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions for either me or Kyle, you can find us on social media. Hit us up with questions. We'll get back to you when we have time. But thank you very much, guys.
Sure. Peace.